Lucky, the dog who found a new life after abandonment. If you feel abandoned, listen to this story. Lucky was a small dog with caramel-colored fur and a wagging tail that seemed to move constantly, as if fueled by unshakable optimism. He lived in a tiny backyard, tethered to a chain that allowed him to shuffle a few feet in any direction, but never to venture beyond the barren patch of dirt where he spent his days. His owners were busy people who rarely paid him any attention. Occasionally, they would toss some leftover scraps his way, which Lucky would gobble up eagerly, not just because of hunger, but out of gratitude for the fleeting moment of acknowledgement. Despite the neglect, Lucky always greeted them with boundless excitement, his tail thumping against the ground and his eyes shimmering with hope. The backyard itself was bleak, with patches of dry grass scattered across the hard earth. A rusty old bowl sat near the fence, often empty, but Lucky would still nudge it with his nose, as if reminding the world he was still there. At night, the stars were his only companions, twinkling above as he curled up on the cold ground, his fur doing little to keep him warm. Though his world was small and lonely, Lucky's heart was vast. He didn't know resentment or bitterness, only a longing to belong. His favorite time of day was the morning when he would hear the creak of the back door opening. Even if all he got was a brief glance or the sound of hurried footsteps, it was enough to fill him with joy. But one day, the routine broke. The mornings came and went, and no one stepped out into the yard. The back door remained shut, and the house, which had once been his distant source of comfort, now felt like a looming silent shadow. Lucky waited and waited. With each passing day, his excitement turned to confusion and then to an aching sadness. The once lively wag of his tail slowed until it stilled altogether. His bowl stayed empty, and the backyard seemed to grow colder and quieter. Lucky didn't understand what he had done to deserve this silence, yet somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope remained. The days stretched into a blur of hunger and solitude. Lucky's once vibrant fur began to lose its sheen, and his energetic bark faded into silence. Still, he remained by the back door, waiting for it to open, waiting for someone to return and remind him he mattered. One fateful morning, however, the sound of heavy footsteps and muffled voices reached his ears. For a moment, Lucky's heart soared with hope. His tail began to wag, a weak but instinctive response to the possibility of seeing his humans again. But what he saw broke the fragile bubble of anticipation. His owners were leaving. From his spot in the yard, Lucky watched as boxes were loaded into a moving truck. Furniture followed piece by piece as his humans bustled back and forth. They never glanced his way, never acknowledged his presence. When the last item was packed, the door to the truck slammed shut and the family climbed inside. Lucky barked then, loud and desperate, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. Surely they had just forgotten to untie him. Surely they would come back for him, but the truck roared to life, the engine drowning out his cries, and slowly it began to pull away. For the first time, Lucky understood the emptiness that had begun to creep into his world. The backyard wasn't just quiet, it was abandoned. He was abandoned. At first, he didn't move from his spot. The chain tethered him to the place he had always called home, and though his instincts whispered that he needed food and water, his heart refused to let him stray. Days passed. His legs grew weaker, and his throat burned with thirst, but still he waited, eyes fixed on the gate. Eventually, the gnawing pain in his belly overpowered the ache in his heart. Lucky realized that no one was coming back. Not today, not ever. With trembling legs, he pulled against the chain. It strained and resisted, but Lucky was determined. The will to survive sparked something deep within him, and after several attempts, the rusted clasp gave way with a metallic snap. For the first time, Lucky was free, but his freedom felt hollow. The world beyond the fence was vast and unfamiliar. Fear churned in his chest as he hesitantly padded toward the open street. The smells were overwhelming: cars, garbage, the faint trace of other dogs, but his hunger pushed him forward. The first few nights were the hardest. Without the fence to define his boundaries, the world felt infinite and terrifying. Lucky scavenged what little he could from overturned trash bins and scraps left behind by strangers. People who passed him on the sidewalk either ignored him or shooed him away, their faces cold and unkind. Loneliness settled over him like a heavy blanket, and he began to question his worth. If even his family had left him, what hope did he have of finding kindness elsewhere? As the days turned into weeks, Lucky's once hopeful spirit grew dim. He had escaped his chain, but in its place was an invisible weight, a burden of doubt and sorrow that followed him wherever he went. Little did Lucky know, his journey was far from over. Lucky's paws ached as he wandered aimlessly through streets and alleys, his once soft pads now cracked and sore from days of walking. His caramel fur, once smooth and shiny, was matted with dirt and grime. Every trash bin he approached felt like a gamble, sometimes yielding a half-eaten sandwich, other times only disappointment. The nights were the worst. Without the fence that had once enclosed him, the world felt hostile and vast. Lucky huddled in corners or under broken benches, trembling as the cold bit into his thin body. The city was loud and unkind, filled with blaring horns and the distant hum of human activity. Stray dogs growled when he ventured too close to their territory, and people often ignored his desperate, pleading eyes. It wasn't long before a storm rolled in, the clouds heavy and grey, as though reflecting Lucky's turmoil. Rain began to pour in relentless sheets, soaking him to the bone as he searched for shelter. He found a narrow space beneath a rickety wooden bridge, just enough to keep him dry from the worst of the downpour. Curled up in the dirt, Lucky felt the weight of everything pressing down on him, the hunger gnawing at his belly, the exhaustion that made his legs feel like lead, and the deep, aching loneliness. He had always been optimistic, finding joy even in the smallest gestures, but now he began to wonder if hope itself was slipping through his pores. As the rain pelted the ground outside, Lucky watched a shallow puddle form nearby. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the murky water, and for the first time, he didn't recognize the dog staring back at him. "What happened to me?" he wondered, his head resting on his muddy paws. He thought back to the days when he had waited so eagerly for a kind word, a pat on the head, or even just the sound of footsteps near the back door. Those days felt like a distant memory now, and the yard he had once called home seemed like another lifetime. Tears welled in his tired eyes, mixing with the rain that dripped from the bridge above. Lucky let out a low, mournful whimper that turned into a quiet howl, a sound that echoed his loneliness and longing. It was a cry for help, though no one was there to hear it. For hours, Lucky lay under the bridge, his small body curled tightly against the cold. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine a place where he was safe, warm, and loved. But even in his dreams, the shadows of doubt loomed large. When the storm finally passed, the silence that followed was deafening. The air was heavy and damp, and the world around him seemed just as bleak as before. Lucky forced himself to stand, his legs trembling under his weight. The puddle reflected his broken frame once more, but this time he looked away. Though his body was weak, something deep inside him whispered that he couldn't give up. Not yet. There had to be more to his journey, even if he couldn't see it. With unsteady steps, Lucky ventured back into the streets, carrying the faintest spark of hope. Little did he know, his life was about to take an unexpected turn. Lucky trudged through the empty streets, each step heavier than the last. Hunger had become a constant companion, gnawing at him relentlessly. His once strong, lively frame now seemed frail, his ribs visible beneath his muddy fur. The scent of discarded food from a distant alley gave him a momentary surge of energy, But when he reached the source, all that remained were scraps picked clean by others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Lucky found himself in an unfamiliar neighborhood. The houses here were larger, surrounded by manicured lawns and tall iron gates. He paused at one gate, peering through its bars at a spacious yard where another dog was playing with a family. The scene before him was like something out of a dream. A child laughed as the dog, a golden retriever, chased a ball and brought it back, tail wagging furiously. The parents watched, smiling warmly. Lucky's ears drooped, and he turned away, unable to bear the ache that swelled in his chest. "Oh, why not me?" he thought, a lump forming in his throat. "What did I do wrong?" The memory of his old backyard crept into his mind. The chain, the empty bowl, the waiting. He'd been loyal, always hopeful, but it hadn't been enough. Now here he was, alone and unwanted, while others seemed to have everything he had ever dreamed of. That night, Lucky found shelter in an abandoned shed at the edge of the neighborhood. The wooden walls offered some protection from the cold, but the emptiness inside mirrored the hollowness he felt. He curled up on the dirt floor, tucking his nose under his paw, but sleep didn't come easily. Instead, his mind churned with questions he couldn't answer. Was it my fault? Was I not good enough? The world felt impossibly large, and Lucky felt impossibly small. For the first time, despair took hold of him fully. His tail, once a reliable source of expression, lay limp against the ground. Even his hope, the tiny ember that had carried him this far, seemed to flicker dangerously close to extinguishing. Outside, the night deepened. The stars blinked down at him, distant and indifferent. Lucky closed his eyes and let out a long sigh, his body shivering from the chill that seeped through the shed's cracked walls. In the stillness, something stirred within him. A voice, faint but persistent. "You've come this far. Don't give up." It wasn't a voice he recognized, but it felt like a memory, a whisper of the hope he had carried for so long. But his exhaustion was stronger. "I can't keep going," he thought, his heart heavy with doubt. "What's the point if no one cares?" The voice didn't answer. The shed grew quieter, and the only sound was the soft rhythm of his breathing. For a moment it seemed as though Lucky might finally give in to the weight of it all. And then, faintly, he heard something. A sound that didn't belong to the night's stillness. It was a rustle, soft but deliberate, followed by footsteps. Lucky's ears perked up ever so slightly, his body too drained to move, but his curiosity barely stirring. The footsteps grew closer until they stopped just outside the shed. Lucky lifted his head weakly, his eyes barely open. In the dim light of the moon, a figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted but unmistakably human. "Hello there," a warm, gentle voice said, breaking the silence. Lucky blinked, unsure if he was dreaming. But as the figure knelt down and extended a hand, the flicker of hope in his heart began to grow once more. Lucky's tired eyes locked onto the figure in the doorway. The voice was soft, gentle, so different from the harsh tones he had grown used to hearing on the streets. For a moment, he didn't move, unsure whether this stranger was a source of kindness or something to fear. The figure leaned closer, revealing a woman in her late 30s. Her hair was tied back, and her face carried an expression of concern. She knelt down, carefully placing a small bowl of water on the ground between them. "It's okay," she whispered, her tone soothing. "You're safe now." Lucky's nose twitched as the scent of the water reached him, but he hesitated. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Still, his thirst pushed him forward, and with slow, cautious steps, he inched toward the bowl. The woman stayed perfectly still, watching him with soft eyes as he began to lap up the water. "You look like you've been through a lot," she said quietly, her voice almost trembling. But you're not alone anymore." The words hung in the air, wrapping around Lucky like a blanket. When he finished drinking, he took a step back, studying her. She didn't make any sudden moves. Instead, she pulled something from her bag, a small piece of bread, and placed it near him. Lucky sniffed the bread cautiously before taking it in his mouth. It wasn't much, but the taste was a balm to his hunger, and he wagged his tail faintly for the first time in days. Encouraged, the woman extended her hand, palm open, giving Lucky the choice to come closer. His instincts told him to retreat, but the warmth in her gaze reminded him of something he thought he had lost, a chance to be cared for. Slowly, he pressed his nose against her hand, feeling the gentle warmth of her touch. "There you go," she said, her lips curving into a smile. "I'm Clara, and you, little one, you deserve a better life." Clara reached into her bag again and pulled out a leash, not the heavy chain Lucky was used to, but a soft, colorful strap. She held it out for him to see. "This isn't to keep you tied down," she said, as if understanding his unspoken fear. "It's just to keep you safe." Lucky hesitated, but didn't pull away when she clipped the leash to his makeshift collar. Slowly she stood and gave a gentle tug, inviting him to follow. "Come on," she urged. "Let's get you somewhere warm." The journey to Clara's home was quiet, the night air cool but calm. Lucky trotted beside her, his steps still uncertain but more confident with every passing moment. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't wandering aimlessly. Clara's home was small but cozy, with a warm light spilling from the windows. She led Lucky inside, guiding him to a soft blanket she had spread out on the floor. "This is for you," she said, patting the spot gently. Lucky lowered himself onto the blanket, his body sinking into the softness. It was the first time he'd felt real comfort in what felt like a lifetime. Clara brought over a bowl of food, real food, and set it down in front of him. He ate slowly at first, as though afraid it might vanish, but soon his hunger overtook his caution. As he ate, Clara sat nearby, watching him with a mix of relief and sadness. "I don't know what you've been through," she murmured, "but you're safe now, Lucky." The name caught him off guard. He looked up, tilting his head slightly. Clara smiled. "Yes, Lucky. That's what I'll call you, because no matter how hard things have been, you've made it through. And that makes you lucky." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucky felt something he thought he had lost: hope. Lying on the blanket, his stomach full and his body warm, he drifted off to sleep, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he never imagined. Lucky's days began to fill with moments he had once only dreamed of. Each morning, he woke to the sound of Clara's voice, soft and cheerful, as she greeted him with a warm smile. His blanket had become his safe haven, a far cry from the cold dirt and damp alleyways that had once been his only refuge. The first time Clara brought out a leash and invited him to go for a walk, Lucky froze. His memories of being tethered to a chain resurfaced, making his heart race. But Clara knelt beside him, her gentle hand stroking his fur. "It's different now, Lucky," she said softly. "You're not tied down. You're free, but I'll walk with you." Her words calmed the storm within him, and with a tentative step, Lucky followed her to the door. The world outside Clara's home was no longer a hostile maze of uncertainty. It was a place to explore, filled with fresh scents, new sights, and most importantly, safety. Clara took Lucky to a nearby park, a vibrant green haven where other dogs played freely. At first, Lucky stuck close to her side, unsure of the new environment. But as days turned into weeks, he began to venture further, his tail wagging more often and his steps lighter. He even started to make friends with the other dogs, exchanging playful barks and bounding across the grass with an energy he thought he had lost forever. Clara's love and care were transformative. Lucky's caramel coat regained its shine, and his body grew stronger with each passing day. But the biggest change was in his spirit. The weight of loneliness and despair that had once crushed him was replaced by a sense of belonging. One afternoon, Clara sat with Lucky on a bench at the park, gently scratching behind his ears. "You've come so far," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Do you know how special you are, Lucky? You've taught me as much as I've taught you." Lucky leaned into her touch, his eyes closing in contentment. For the first time, he felt like he was more than just a survivor. He was someone's companion, someone's source of joy. But his transformation wasn't just internal. The kindness Clara had shown him inspired him to share that warmth with others. One day, as they walked through the park, Lucky noticed a small, scruffy dog huddled beneath a bush. The dog's eyes were wide with fear, its thin frame trembling. Lucky stopped in his tracks, pulling gently on the leash. Clara followed his gaze and knelt down. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, reaching out to the frightened dog. Lucky stepped closer, his posture calm and welcoming. His presence seemed to reassure the stray, who eventually allowed Clara to lift it into her arms. From that day forward, Lucky wasn't just a companion, he became a symbol of hope for others. Clara began fostering other abandoned dogs, and Lucky played an active role in their recovery. He was patient with their fears, offering quiet companionship and teaching them in his own way that life could get better. As time passed, Lucky's story spread among the community. People who had seen him at his lowest marveled at the joyful, spirited dog he had become. To Clara, Lucky was more than a dog. He was proof of the power of resilience and love. Though his journey had been filled with pain and struggle, Lucky no longer carried the weight of those memories. Instead, he wore his past like a badge of courage, a testament to his strength. Every wag of his tail, every playful bark, was a reminder that even the darkest moments could lead to a brighter future. And Lucky, now thriving in his new life, had found his purpose, not just to live, but to inspire others to believe in the possibility of transformation. The transformation of Lucky's life had been nothing short of miraculous. From the abandoned dog huddled under a bridge to a cherished companion bringing hope to others, his journey was now a beacon of light for all who crossed his path. Clara's home had become a sanctuary, not just for Lucky, but for other animals in need. The once silent house now echoed with the sounds of playful barks and wagging tails. Every morning, Lucky bounded to the door, ready for his daily walks with Clara. The leash, which had once symbolized confinement, was now a connection to freedom, trust, and love. On their walks, neighbors often stopped to greet him, some remembering the frail, skittish dog he used to be. Children ran up to pet him, their laughter filling the air as Lucky wagged his tail in delight. One sunny afternoon, Clara took Lucky to a community event in the park. It was a fundraiser for local animal rescues, and Lucky was invited as a special guest. A banner hung above a tent with his name on it, Lucky from Lost to Loved. His story had inspired many, and Clara proudly shared it with anyone who asked. During the event, a little boy approached with wide, curious eyes. "Is this the dog from the story?" he asked, pointing at Lucky's picture on a poster. Clara smiled and nodded. "Yes, this is Lucky." The boy crouched down, gently patting Lucky's head. "He's so happy now," the boy said. "Was he really alone before?" Clara's voice softened as she replied, "Yes, he was. But Lucky taught me something important. Even when everything seems hopeless, a little kindness can change everything." He didn't give up, and because of that, we found each other. Lucky nuzzled the boy's hand as if to affirm Clara's words. The moment was simple, yet profound, a reflection of the lesson Lucky's journey embodied. As the day wound down and the sun began to set, Clara and Lucky sat together on the grass, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The park was quieter now, but the warmth of the day lingered. Clara rested a hand on Lucky's back, her touch filled with gratitude. "You've done so much, Lucky," she said, her voice tender. "Not just for me, but for everyone you've met. You're a reminder that no matter how dark things get, there's always a chance for something beautiful to grow." Lucky looked up at her, his caramel eyes shining with a wisdom that seemed almost human. In that moment, it was as if he understood the weight of her words. As the stars began to appear, Lucky's story had come full circle. What began as a tale of abandonment and despair had become a testament to resilience, love, and the power of second chances. Lucky wasn't just a survivor. He was a symbol of hope for all who felt lost or forgotten. For anyone who doubted their worth or believed their struggles were insurmountable, Lucky's journey served as a powerful reminder. Life can change in unimaginable ways when you hold on, when you trust in the possibility of better days, and when kindness finds its way to you. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And don't forget, there's always a Lucky out there waiting for their chance at a new life. Let's make a difference, one act of kindness at a time.